Today we're going to be learning about Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte was a French military and political leader who was able to rise to power in the struggling nation. He then was able to dominate France and become the emperor. When he arose to power, many people welcomed him as it was the first solid form of government in a while. He fought over 60 battles, only losing 7. Through the many wars France was fighting, Napoleon was able to rise to power by just demonstrating his skill as a military leader. Ironically, the wars also caused his decline in power.
Napoleon Bonaparte was an artillery commander whose skill in combat allowed him to gain power in the military. The levée en masse caused an influx in the number of soldiers, but since many nobles had fled, there weren't many people to control them, allowing young officers to rise in power. He rose in ranks, and at 26 he was commanding his own army. He was a master at using cannons to help attack and force others to retreat. Also, he was very good at executing military maneuvers no matter how difficult. His battle prowess made him a hero. The Directory, a ruling power in France with little to no popularity with the people, had relied on Napoleon multiple times to put down rebellion. However, Napoleon saw this weakness and imposed a coup d'état, becoming the dictator, naming himself the first consul. Then, with the support of the people, he took the crown from the Pope and crowned himself emperor.
Napoleon was able to gain absolute power in a variety of ways. One of these ways was that he had come up with the Napoleonic Code to make it where instead of 300 different laws, there was only 5. This made it easier for him to gain power since he had a lot less laws to maintain and enforce on the French people. One other way that Napoleon kept the power is that he appealed to the people by making taxes more payable and fining corrupt officials from the civil service, also known as bureaucracy. He also established schools called lycees where anybody could attend and be educated and could work in the government. Napoleon also made it so position in the government was made off merit and not family connections. Then the last thing that he did to fix the civil service was establish a bank to maintain the supply of money. After all of his accomplishments, Napoleon tried to take back Saint Domingue, Haiti, but a colony revolted against him, and the British having control of the seas only increased the security of the island. This led to Napoleon selling Louisiana to the United States for $15 million so he could support his military efforts. After starting his military expedition, he had a monumental amount of military victories. First being the Battle of Austerlitz, where he defeated the Austrian-Russian army that was twice as large as his own, by separating his army into 2 halves and sandwiching the larger army. Then Napoleon defeated the Prussians in the Battle of Jena, and in control of Germany he got rid of the Holy Roman Empire, organizing the German kingdoms into the German Confederacy. Then the last battle that Napoleon had won in this series was the Battle of Tilsit against the Russians, where he then made the Russian general Alexander I accept to an alliance with France.
The beginning of Napoleon's downfall was through a series of failed battles. The first was the war with Spain. The Spanish used a guerrilla warfare tactic in this war while facing the much larger French army, and they ended up beating the French. Another one of his failed wars was his attempt to capture Russia. Napoleon planned that this invasion of Russia was going to be a cinch with his 400,000-person army, and that the Russians would be defeated in only one battle. But the Russians, seeing that they were outnumbered, retreated further into Russia and destroyed everything that the French could use for support. Once Napoleon captured the city of Moscow, the Russians burned it to the ground. Due to the fact that the French simply couldn't make the Russians surrender, and also with the fact that winter was approaching, Napoleon began to retreat from Moscow. Now was when the Russians began to attack while the French were leaving. Only 94,000 of the French army actually returned from Russia, and only 20,000 of them were in fighting condition. Shortly after this, the combined armies of Russia, Austria, and Prussia advanced on France and ended Napoleon's rule. Another major part of his downfall was his attempt to establish the continental system. This was established by Napoleon to make sure that none of the European countries would be able to trade with Britain. However, this did not weaken Britain whatsoever, or benefit Napoleon at all, and in fact backfired and weakened the economy of Europe as a whole. The people turned against Napoleon after this and did not trust him anymore. The Battle of Trafalgar was the starting point where Napoleon planned to invade England and take control of it. However, in this battle, his army was crushed by the English force, and from this point on was when the English army refused to make any peace with France whatsoever.
In 1814, just a few short years after the Battle of Trafalgar, Napoleon was exiled to Elba, an island in the Mediterranean with about 12,000 inhabitants. At his time in the island, he tried to commit suicide by ingesting a suicide pill, which contained many toxins. He had been carrying this pill since his invasion on Russia, and the potency had weakened, leaving him feeble and sick. In the first months of his arrival, he built a small army, navy, and iron mines. Napoleon then left the island in 1815, and the 100 Days marked a period in time when Napoleon was exiled from Elba back to Paris. This period in time saw many wars, including War of the Seventh Coalition, the Waterloo Campaign, and the Neapolitan War. Throughout this period in time, Napoleon reclaimed his status as emperor in France, but all that ended in the Battle of Waterloo. This was a battle between the Seventh Coalition and France, fought in what is modern-day Belgium, and it was all a part of Napoleon's larger scheme called the Waterloo Campaign. Napoleon was able to hold off the coalition for a while until the Prussians arrived and broke through Napoleon's right flank, ultimately causing his loss. This loss ensured the restoration of the throne to King Louis XVII, and it was the final stage of France's domination of Europe, started by the French Revolution. Fearing what Napoleon could do again, the coalition exiled him to St. Helena, where he spent the rest of his life in a dark and unhealthy cabin. Many speculate that the British had intentionally kept it unlivable just to hasten Napoleon's death, and in February 1821, Napoleon's health declined, and on May 5th, 1821, he eventually died on St. Helena from stomach cancer.
Napoleon Bonaparte was an excellent military leader and strategist during his radical control over France. Ironically, his love for war caused his downfall and eventually his death. During his time as leader, he changed the social and political aspects of life, not only in France but in all of Europe. That inspired many rulers like Napoleon to come to power. He gave rise to a new model of society called socialism, which influenced future French revolutions and revolutions around the world. Napoleon influenced other countries' political values with his ideals of firing corrupt officials from the government and establishing schools for all to be educated, where they started doing the same. Essentially, Napoleon ushered forth a new era in European history.